Good evening, all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading to haunted houses for a collection of scary stories. So buckle up because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened to me when I was home alone on more than one occasion. I heard silverware rattling in the drawer downstairs in the kitchen. So I snuck downstairs and on one occasion slowly crept to the kitchen door. The silverware was still clanging, and just as I began to peek into the kitchen, I heard the drawer slam shut, and no one was there. A friend brought her keyboard to our house, set it up in the family room, and started playing Christmas tunes. After a tune or two, the temperature dropped considerably in the room, and my border collie looked up at the ceiling with that "it's great to see you" look on his face. Sitting in the family room with my dad watching TV, and we see the shadowy silhouette of a woman move slowly from left to right across the room on the wall above the fireplace. My dad woke up in the night to pee, and when he stepped out of the bathroom, he heard the voice of a young girl cry out, "Mama?" I fell asleep on the family sofa for half an hour, and woke up to find the floor strewn with popcorn, which we always kept in the kitchen pantry, and I was home alone. On another occasion, my dad woke up in the night and noticed my mum across the room looking out the window. He was just about to speak to her when he felt my actual mum stir next to him on her bed. He said he just pulled the blankets over his head and finally went back to sleep. We lived in New Jersey on a property that was occupied by a family-run tavern in the early 1800s, and we've never felt threatened, but it has been spooky from time to time. I'm pretty sure the house I grew up in was haunted. One time when I was 13, it was around 10 a.m. or so in the summer, and my family had gone to the shop. I went to the loo and heard really heavy footsteps, like a big guy in boots climbing the stairs slowly, and then moved towards the bathroom. I was terrified but shouted, "Hello?" And as soon as I did, the steps turned around without changing pace and went into my parents' room. I remember jumping off the loo and running downstairs. I could hear the footsteps above me and in the front room. It sounded like someone was messing with the plugs. I can't remember how long it took to stop, but it must have been a while. On another occasion, I was home alone, and all the kitchen cupboards started opening and slamming shut really loudly. My dog refused to go downstairs, so I chickened out and just stayed in my room until my parents got home. I thought they were home, and it was them at first, but I checked out the window and the car wasn't there. Every time I went down the stairs, it was a creepy feeling, like someone was looming over me. I had an image of a tall, broad guy with his hands over my shoulders about to push me every time. I used to think that it was my fear of falling down the stairs, but since we moved, I've never since had that feeling. I mentioned it to my sister and my dad, and they both felt it too. There was also one time my bed started violently shaking like someone was hitting it. It was a bunk bed with a desk underneath and was moving a lot. I shouted for my mum and it stopped when she came upstairs. She calmed me down and told me that it was the pipes under the floor. Now she laughs and says, "Yeah, I didn't have a clue as to what to do, so I just said it was the pipes." It felt like someone was hitting the leg of my bed under my head with quite a lot of force. Again, I can't remember what happened after, but it must have stopped quite quickly. My sister and mum also have stories from that house, and my dad, who doesn't believe in these things, generally also agrees the house was haunted, and especially didn't like the stairs, but refuses to share what exactly happened to him. I was about 18 and had moved out of home. Coincidentally, my friend had moved into the house next door to my mum. My friend had a house party like he did most weekends. The night had drawn to a close with nowhere to sleep. I decided to crash at my mum's house. No one was home, but I had a set of keys and let myself in. I got settled in one of the rooms, and after about 10 minutes, I could hear someone breathing at the end of the bed. I was very drunk and decided to ignore it. The next day, my family came home. I told them about how drunk I was, and it sounded like someone was breathing in the next room, although I didn't disclose where the sound was coming from. To which my mum relayed that she'd heard it too, and had a medium check the room. The medium confirmed there was an old man at the end of the bed. He wasn't sinister, and just enjoyed relaxing in that particular spot. We bought a house where the original owner had a stroke in our bedroom. He stayed alive for about a year in the hospital and passed away a few months before we obtained ownership. It was a hell of a process getting the house, but that's another story. The first few nights we had some strange things happening, and I chalked it up to the first time ownership and not used to our surroundings. I woke up twice talking to someone. Another morning my husband got up to go to work, and he closed our door and went into the kitchen. My dogs were in the mudroom, and I was 100% sure I heard him let them out. I could hear the tick-tick-tick of their nails hitting the floor and coming down the hallway. Then I heard a growl, and was startled awake and woke up to find the hallway lights off and the dogs still in the mudroom. About a week in, I went to my morning job, and when I came home I smelled floral perfume, and my first thought was the previous owner's daughter must have come into our house. So I called my husband and told him to buy new locks because I'm pretty sure someone came in without asking. He replied with, "I smelled that when I went to work at 5 a.m. I froze because I never smelt it when I left for work, and I left around 8. He said it was probably my laundry detergent, but I don't buy floral detergent, and it doesn't smell like that. So as years went by, small things would happen. I'd hear bangs, knocking, and would see shadows from the corner of my eye. I even had our kitchen window open in the middle of winter. My dog was pushed off the couch and wouldn't go back up on there. Outside, a door would constantly be open and it drove me nuts. One day it would be the shop, one day it would be the barn, another day it would be in the garage, and I always have a habit of double-checking doors to make sure they're closed. Recently I woke up to our office door open, which I usually keep closed because I need darkness when I sleep, and we don't have proper curtains and the light just shines in. I also smudged the house and things have quieted down big time. But my husband and I are going through a divorce, and I met another guy and started dating him. And there's crap that goes on there too. I smudged that place as well, and now things are happening outside. I'm pretty convinced either he or I are cursed. My old house, about 2 houses ago, was haunted. My husband is in the military, and leaves for weeks or months at a time. He was TDY, had been gone about 3 weeks at the time, and I tucked our girls in and went to bed. I read for a bit, made sure the girls were asleep, and then got back in bed. I pulled the blankets up, snuggled in, and felt my husband crawl into bed next to me and hug me, like one of those hugs that are filled with love, protection, and are just the best kind when in bed. I felt so safe, so warm and loved, and I sort of wallowed in the hug for a moment, until it hit me that no one was in the room with me. I didn't get freaked out, because it wasn't scary. Another thing that would happen is there was a little girl in a white frilly dress out of the corner of my eye I would sometimes see. Only when my husband was gone though, never when he was home. My girls had instances as well. They both played with the girl, but neither told each other about it, or my husband and I. Not until years later, and my youngest asked me about the blonde neighbor girl we had, who always wore a white dress, as she was 3, 4, and 5 while at this home. And my eldest was like, "Yeah, what was her name? She'd played with her before bedtime a lot, and then she would leave." When we moved from the house, I had left my pillow there and ran back to get it. I went upstairs, grabbed it, and then we stopped on the landing of the stairs and just stood a moment and said, "Bye, house," because you could feel it there. And seconds later, I felt like something wanted to push me down the stairs, so I booked it out of there. I didn't say anything to anyone because I figured I was just going a tad crazy. My husband went a week later to take all the garbage out and stopped on the landing, and then did the same thing. Said, "Bye, you were a great house," and he felt like he was going to get pushed down the stairs. Only he flew home and told me, didn't care if he was seen as crazy or not. That's when we started talking about all the weird stuff that would happen, but never connected it to being haunted as such. Other little things like going in the basement at night, you would be overcome with a feeling of utter dread, and we took to doing the laundry only in the day. Our cats would stare at spots that had nothing in them and puff for no reason. Overall, it wasn't a bad house. We loved it there, but moved due to horrible neighbors that mucked up the neighborhood to the point where we couldn't stay. Parties every night, loud fights, etc. Not the best for raising children. My best friend's house, back when we were growing up, was haunted, in my humble opinion. He lived in an 100-year-old farmhouse out in the country, but they all treated it like the haunting was completely normal. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal, and since my friend was always a good one for pranking and duping me, I wasn't buying it when he told me it was haunted. He told me some of the commonplace things that would happen all the time to him and his family, like objects moving randomly, cabinets/doors opening unassisted, the feeling that someone was just on the edge of your peripheral vision, but when you turned to look, no one was there, inexplicable cold breezes when windows weren't open, that sort of thing. I experienced a few things like that when we hung out there, but they were easy to dismiss as something explainable, so I didn't fully believe the house was haunted. I didn't mind hanging out there, but there was an odd vibe to the house that I really can't describe. Because I was skeptical, and he kept insisting strange things happened in the house, I wanted to throw him under the bus and got brave enough one time to ask his mum about the hauntings right in front of him. I thought she would downplay it or tell me he was full of BS, but she should have shrugged it off and said they've all gotten used to the occurrences and they were all harmless. Honestly, not the response I expected, but I did let myself become a little less skeptical after that. I finally accepted the hauntings were real on one of the last times I stayed the night. Before they moved, in the kitchen there was a door with a hook latch that leads down to the basement/crawl space where they kept all the things they pickled and canned. The house was old, so the wall that the door was on had a noticeable lean, which meant the door could only rest in the shut position or will be completely open and against the wall. If you held it straight out, it would either slam shut or slam against the wall. It was late one night, and we were up playing Halo on the Xbox after his parents had gone to bed. In the midst of playing, he stopped and said, "Look, look, look," while nodding towards the kitchen. I could faintly hear the latch come undone and turned my head just in time to watch the basement door slowly open, past the midpoint, then slam against the wall as if someone had just let go. It didn't faze my friend in the least, and he got right back into the game after it happened. Since I was immersed in the game as well, I didn't really take the time to acknowledge what happened. I remember going upstairs to sleep that night and lying awake trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. Partly trying to think of a logical explanation, partly scared because I'd never seen anything like that before. That was back when we were in the middle of school, and now we're in our mid-30s. I attend a research university and pride myself on being a critical thinker, trusting empirical knowledge and making sense of the world around me, with an evidence-based approach. To this day, I can't explain how that door opening could be possible without the assistance of something. I know it was just a door opening 20 years ago. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of paranormal videos of doors opening inexplicably, and largely, I have a hard time believing them. But yet, when I think about my experience, I'm convinced that something paranormal made it happen. I live in a house I grew up in and inherited. My grandfather died upstairs in one of the 2 bedrooms up there, in what is now a glamour room. When I was around 8 years old, I remember being very afraid of him. Then about 4 years ago, I found my dad passed away after doing a wellness check on him downstairs in the dining room. That's when I completely renovated the house with the intent to sell, but after seeing it with a nice new facelift, I couldn't let it go and moved in. In regards to activity, I noticed spikes of activity. I've never been a believer in spirits or ghosts of any sort. I rely on facts and science to prove things, but some of the stuff, along with major events, have stumped me, and I've had to settle on the thought that energy from my father has gotten trapped in a loop downstairs, and upstairs I'm still unsure of, but I do believe the activity relating to upstairs versus downstairs are different, and come from the deaths of the different people who died on the story of that house. The spikes of the activity I've noticed happen gradually, with increased severity, starting small then becoming a major activity or event, over the course of about 3 months-ish, and then everything goes away for about 6 months. The major event activity, which usually is, I've noticed, the end of a string of building up events, have caused me to reach out to people who do ghost hunter-esque type things on the house, but by the time I hear back from them, I notice everything stops, so I leave it alone. We are currently in an active phase. So, one common thing is that I will be cooking in the kitchen next to the dining room, and I'll set down my mixing bowl or my ladle, and I'll turn around to meal prep on the other counter, and when I turn back to grab it, it's gone. This makes me feel insane, and I have spent around an hour searching the entire house and all the cabinets and the drawers for me to be turning around again after finally being like, well, never mind, it's gone, and going back to cooking, and then it's back in its original position. This small event made me check my carbon monoxide detector. Another one is the sound of static with talking, like a walkie-talkie from behind my headboard. The wall is against the dining room where my dad passed away, and both me and my ex-husband heard it. While we're laying down to sleep with everything off, I know my father died with the stereo on playing music, which he kept in the dining room against the wall that my headboard is on. I researched and read some crazy stuff about how an overhead fan turned on and can pick up radio signals, so I chalked it up to that. Another one recently has been my TV turning on by itself at around 2 or 3 a.m. and waking up me and my current fiancé. The volume is always turned to max at 100 when this happens, and it scares the hell out of us. We don't watch TV at that volume, and it's happened 2 or 3 times now, and is a relatively newer event. We also have our living room lights on. There are 2 that are built in to a very high ceiling that turn on both with one switch, and lately, when we are watching TV and turn them off, one will turn on by itself, only when we're sitting there though, and this has never happened when we turn the lights off to go to bed, but it will repeatedly happen while we sit there. I've had an electrician come round to check for shorts and check the wiring, and he found nothing wrong. Footsteps running and walking upstairs. These go from our loft to the glamour room only, and it's a very obvious sound. Those are the rooms my grandfather would be in. This would be relevant for a major activity event discussed in a bit. Another thing is that in the glamour room I constantly hear a phone vibrating like it's ringing, and then it stops. There is a door to the attic from the closet that also connects to the garage, but I've checked it for phones, but any phone up there would have died. I do keep my dad's ashes and cell phone in that closet, but his phone has long since perished and no longer turns on. When talking about major activity, I do have something to discuss with you. The first thing happened about 6 months after I moved in, and the disappearing kitchen stuff started happening. Then the next week or so was the radio/walkie-talkie sound from behind the headboard. About 3 nights after, my now ex-husband and I were laying in bed and trying to go to sleep when something pounded on the kitchen sliding glass door. 3 large bangs. We both shot up from bed and he grabbed a baseball bat and went to have a look. It sounded like someone was trying to break in or break the glass. We have Ring cameras installed around the whole house that alert us to any and all activity, and we checked those, and there were no motions in the backyard, and you could clearly see the patio door when the sound occurred. There was nothing there. When we investigated the door, there was a handprint from it, like when you press your face up against the glass and your breath frogs it up and leaves an imprint. I took a picture and we spoke about calling the police, but didn't due to the fact no one was there. So we went to bed, and the next day investigated how the noise happened. I had him pound on the door in the same way from the outside, open-handed, closed-handed, then for the same from the inside. The sounds were completely different, and we both immediately could hear the sound was a flat open hand that came from the inside. I could only come up with a theory that maybe the energy trap from my dad's last days or routine or something like that caused it, but I don't know. The next major event was about 6 months after the string of smaller activities, mostly the footsteps and upstairs stuff like the phone vibrating. Well, one night around 2, I was awoken to what sounded like running around upstairs. My son was 2 or 3 at the time, and his room is across from my glamour room. So, I got up in full mum mode, ready to go catch this little guy and put him back in bed. I go upstairs and open his door to find him fast asleep. So I freak out a bit and decide to slowly turn around and open the glamour room door. And I will never forget this for as long as I live. When I opened the door, everything was dark, from the lights being off, but the closet for that room is directly across the entrance hall. And I swear on my life there was a little red light, like from a recording camera, and I heard a phone notification go off, like the old school Jurassic Park phone notifications. I slammed that door, grab my son, wake up my ex-husband and have him go investigate, but there's no one. At this point I'm convinced we have a squatter in our attic, so I have my ex-husband drill the freaking access door shut. The next day we investigate, and there's no one in there nor any signs. It would set off one of our Ring cameras to access the garage if they broke in and got up there, but once I drilled that door shut, it all stopped, or the phone vibrating up there along with the footsteps. So, the latest major event, not that major compared to the other 2, is late at night. My organizer that holds all the over-the-counter medication in my pantry, which is on a shelf against the wall, and had a solid 2 inches of shelf in front of it, and is not hanging off, somehow completely pushed itself off the shelf in the middle of the night, woke up my new fiancé and I, and this was about a week after the lights in the TV turning on incident. It might actually be a small event, because we are still having the lights thing happen. So there it is. I've contacted ghost hunter types, but the activity will not go away. I lived with my grandparents for a bit, and I'm convinced their house is haunted. Multiple times I would see someone walking past my doorway. I had a basement room in a partially finished basement, and would think it was my grandpa until I remembered I was home alone. The few times my grandma was home, and it happened, she claimed she hadn't been downstairs. In days, I believed her, and she started to avoid the stairs when she could. Also, the person never went up the stairs, always just down the stairs, so never made a sound. My grandma is a stomper when she walks, but there would be a silhouette of a person passing the doorway, and a shadow across the wall from the thing crossing in front of the window. I kept the door closed when I was in my room after a while, and one time was still sleeping in my bed with my other sister, and I was going to creep her out by making grudge noises from the doorway. When the shadow went by, we both jerked upright and looked around, because we were the only ones in the area, so we went to the window to see if one of us had made the shadow based off the lighting, but we couldn't replicate it. We also discussed alternatives for how it could have happened, when the shadow passed again. My sister and I both shut the door after that. My door would open and close on its own, but randomly it would just open up, when I would wake up, my door would be wide open, or if I was grabbing something quickly, I would turn around to a closed door, and I was purposely trying to leave it open so I could rush out of there without seeing anything. One time I was home alone for the weekend and hiding in my room, when I heard a loud crash, so I snuck upstairs to investigate, and there was a picture in the middle of the hallway that had fallen out of the guest room upstairs. The two things that are wrong with this is the notch in the back was the type where you would have to lift it up off the nail, and was still in the wall, and where the picture had landed, it wasn't even possible if it had just fallen off the wall because it had to go around the corner to make it to the hallway, and there was only one crash, so it didn't bounce there. Whatever it was, always seemed more playful than malicious, though. I live in a small abode down on the Kansas-Missouri border. My story is about an abandoned house that changed my opinion on ghosts. The house is a pink two-story home that has been abandoned for over 20 years next to my father's house. The backstory to it is pretty crazy too. This mother that lived there hung her child out of the window on the top floor, then shot herself in the head. Well, since then the house has been in probate and nobody would buy it from the bank. Like I said, it's a small town. We have little funds, so we just let houses stay the way they are. My dad used to tell me about this house, having bubonic plague, so we didn't go there. But shortly after I realized that wasn't the case. While me and a few friends decided to go and explore, we didn't find anything too crazy for a long time, but we didn't dare go upstairs. Around the time I turned 14, I decided I wanted to go upstairs for the first time. I didn't want to go alone. Who can blame me? So a friend and I went upstairs to find a crap ton of letters lying around all over the floor. Some dated back to the 1980s. Nothing creepy in particular, but the odd thing is, they left kind of a trail, and it went to a miniature closet. Me and my friend tried to avoid looking in it, as we really didn't want to. But us, being the little hoodlums that we are, decided we wanted to start breaking things in the house and find ourselves humorous. Then we broke a certain doll. Things got really weird from then on. We started hearing something swaying from the window, so decided to go check it out, but when we looked, nothing was there. We thought it was pretty weird. Was it maybe the ghost of the kid? We later decided we were hungry and wanted to go home to grab something to eat. 2 weeks went by. My friend and I thought it would be cool to hang out in the house again, or just to read some of the letters, or whatever else we could find to entertain ourselves. This is the part where things get really strange. We were sitting on a desk just talking to each other reading the letters when all of a sudden the little closet door starts to creep open. So I look at my friend with a puzzled look on my face and assume he did the same thing, and asked him if he did something to mess with me. He swore up and down he had nothing to do with it, but I didn't believe him. So I went to investigate, and in the closet was the exact same doll that we broke. But get this, the doll was intact. So we went to the area where we broke it to find there wasn't a trace of us breaking it, not a single shard of porcelain on the floor. We went back to the closet and the door was closed again. This time, when I opened the doll was gone. We knew immediately we had to leave the house, so we ran back to my dad's and hopped the fence separating the properties. We didn't return for 3 months, until our curiosity rose again. But this time I bought my own doll to see if it would be affected. Sadly it wasn't. But the doll we saw was nowhere to be found. By this time the house had already been damaged a lot, due to weather. But that didn't stop us. We decided we wanted to go back upstairs where most of the damage occurred. The roof was collapsed, and took some of the floor with it on the way down. So the closet was kind of stuck open at this point. We turned on the flashlight on our phones and played rock, paper, scissors to see who was going into the closet. I lost. So as I was getting down on my hands and knees to crawl in, I heard a little kid's voice, unclear of what was said, but coming from the closet. It kind of sounded like they said if I wanted to play hide and seek, but it was deeply mumbled, like oxygen was cut from the lungs. It creeps me out, and gives me the chills just remembering this. But here I am, 20 years later with this story to share. Needless to say, we never returned to the house again. I used to work for a small remodeling company about 15 years ago. One particular job stands out. We were making some updates to a large ranch home in an upscale neighborhood of St. Louis when my boss and I receive a visitor. We were both working in the dining room when we distinctly heard the screen door in the garage swing open, with the common sound of the wooden screen door's springs stretching and then the screen door slamming shut. The sound of the door was followed by footsteps through the kitchen and moving down the hall. This particular ranch home was the 3 bedrooms, 2 bath variety, with an eating kitchen, formal dining room, front foyer entrance, living room, and family room with a fireplace. The basement was partially finished and had a side entry 2-car garage. The house was divided in half, with a load-bearing wall, with the kitchen being on the opposite side of this wall from the dining room. The dining room was also separated from the kitchen by a solid wood door that swung in both directions and also shared a half wall with the front foyer. So we heard the screen door open and close and footsteps move through the house when the boss says, "That must be William in here to select paint colors from the bedrooms." So my boss proceeds through the door into the kitchen and down the hall calling out William. The boss calls his name several times, all with no answer. When he approaches me at the half wall by the foyer and asks if I saw anyone leave through the front door, I told him no. I had been in one spot wiring a new light and hadn't moved. He asked if I had heard someone come into the house, which I agreed that I had. Then he answers, "Man, there's no one here." We decide at that moment to break for lunch, and while setting up to eat in the garage, William arrived in his car with his paint swatches. This is one of the 2 experiences I've had in this house. I was alone for the second one. That happened when I was streaming wallpaper off a wall in the breakfast nook of the kitchen, when there were suddenly 3 loud bangs from the basement which I could feel through my feet. It felt like someone was banging directly on the floor joints from below me. I heard it a second time and mocked the sound by stomping my feet on the floor 3 times. When I stomped my feet, it was immediately answered by 3 more bangs from below. Even though I was feeling rather tense, I decided to go downstairs for a look but saw nothing. It was a neat basement, although you had to walk a few feet in the dark before you reached the first light, which was turned on by a pull chain. Immediately below where I had been, on the main floor, was the laundry area. A short walk away from the room, there was a built-in storage area for pool cues and billiard balls, and on the floor was a layout for a shuffleboard. I loved working on old houses and loved their history, but I never encountered anything like what this house had to offer. This happened in 2001 when I was 13. The foster family I had just moved into was selling one of their 2 old people homes that they owned. This particular one just so happened to supposedly be placed on the boundary lines of the old Templar kingdom of Walsingham, as it was located in a rough area of Leeds and Yorkshire. After all residents were moved to different care homes, staff laid off before the sale completed and money changed hands, my then foster mother, her ex-care home manager who was her friend, and myself decided to spend the night to make sure all the cleaning was done, all the items/knickknacks removed by removals, and no damage done to the property. The initial plan was to sleep in a camp bed in the living room. My foster mother and her friend slept in a nearby ground floor room. Upon pulling up into the driveway, I can only explain the bad vibes I got. Spidey senses, neck hairs tingling, off the place. Mid-October, early evening darkness. Anyway, I got out of the car, and upon walking up to the front door, I can only explain it as seeing a black cloud/amalgamation of moving darkness through the living room window, correlating in the left-hand corner of the room. This furthering my bad vibes, I stuck close to my foster mother and her friend as we did all the basic chores before bed. As the rooms they were sleeping in had twin beds and was quite big, I asked if I could sleep on the floor so as not to be on my own. Surprisingly, they agreed. We had the TV on until it was time to sleep. My foster mother and her friend were fast asleep when I heard a loud sniffling and I could feel breath on my ear. As I opened my eyes slowly, it was then I heard the most loud, inhuman, and blood-curdling scream of a woman. Then silence. My eyes opened and I jolted up, terrified. What was 30 seconds looking at both my foster mother and her friend sound asleep seemed like an eternity. I screamed, "What the hell?" And my foster mother and her friend woke up to me in tears, explaining the scream, and they did their best to console me and said we should go back to bed and talk in the morning. I couldn't get back to sleep. All I could do was try and rationalize. Yet I could hear a faint clang, clang, clang coming from beneath the floorboards. To be fair, the next morning during last-minute chores and waiting for removals, they listened intently, trying to rationalize, and tried to make light of the ordeal while consoling me. Eventually, they tried to make a joke of it, as they knew by how I looked I was telling the truth, which worked after a few days. After we left next day, after papers were signed, I was told apparently other staff heard the same thing over the 20 years it had been a care home. I found out a rich family bought the place, and they were going to use it as a family home. 2 weeks after the ordeal and me calming down, I asked if the new owners were going to be told the house was haunted. I got a grin and a maybe. If anyone lived in an ex-care home in Leeds, UK, once called Walsingham, a big old house, and had the scare of a lifetime, all I can say is I'm terribly sorry. I have many scary stories from some of my buddies. The first one is about a girl from another school I know. Her parents work with ambassadors, and that requires them to move around a lot. They tend to buy cheap places that they can resell easily when they leave, and once when she was 11, they bought this big old Georgian house really cheap, and they never saw the red flag. The girl is the youngest of 4 siblings, and her 3 older brothers are either in college or have employment. When they moved in, things started disappearing from her room and showing up in the attic, garage, or kitchen, which was weird. Even her mum's engagement ring disappeared one day, and while her mum was alone in the house, the ring came bouncing out of nowhere and hit her on the head. It was all just strange until one night it turned into something else. Her room had a big mirror on the wall next to her bed, and while she was sleeping on her side, she saw a little girl with her neck broken in the back of the mirror, and she freaked the hell out. This happened frequently until it got too heavy for anyone to sustain, and they decided to sell the house. One of the old neighbors came to them one day and said that no one would ever buy the damn house because it had the ghost of a dead girl that hung herself there in the 50s. The next story is about my classmate. For some reason, there's a ghost town in the outskirts of the city where Satanists allegedly go to perform blood rituals, and many really messed up things happen nearby. To go there is a deviation on the road that you have to take and drive until you run into many old brick walls with pentagrams and Baphomet drawn on them. Neighboring that town are many beautiful homes owned by the rich. My classmate lived in one of them. He said that before midnight everyone had to lock their rooms or they would run into ghosts that roamed the house, that tried opening the doors, making them rattle or banging against the wall. He was used to it, but one night he was coming home from a party in his car at 1 a.m. The car happened to break down right on the intersection, and he came out of his car to fix his old-ass engine and left the door open. He went back into the car and noticed there was someone behind him in the back seat, and looked at the rearview mirror and saw an old man that shook. He thought it was a hobo, but when he turned around, he was gone. He could hear him breathing loudly as he was ill, and saw him on the rearview mirror. Talk about freaky. The final story is about a guy called Roderick at my school. He was 2 years older than me and used to live in this huge home outside, and I mean far away from the city. Sometimes Roderick and his little sister had to stay alone in that house because their parents would leave for parties. Their bedrooms were on the 2nd floor, and Rod would hear banging noises from the 1st floor. Him being the elder brother had to go and check, and they always came from the kitchen, and when he got closer, the noises would become louder and faster until he heard someone running barefoot towards the door. Logically, he just ran into his sister's room and locked the door. He guarded his sister the entire night, and he came super tired to class, which is when I asked him and he told me. He moved to another city for college, thankfully, after that. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so very much for listening. I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you. If any of you have a story you wish to share, you can put it on my Reddit page or submit it to me directly via email. And I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all my members and patrons who have made this year incredible by your support and contributions. It really means the world, so thank you so much. You can also find links to more videos on screen now, and I hope that you enjoy. I'm going to leave it here for now, so stay awesome, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.